All right, so let me now briefly recapitulate. So we were discussing about the chapter of architecture, and in architecture, I explained to you that largely the temple architecture started from the Gupta period, and by the end of the Gupta period, it became an established field of art of India, uh, especially in north and the southern part of India as well. And what do we notice that when in the northern part of India, the Gupta Empire was declining, at the same point of time, in the southern part of India, some new kingdoms were emerging. And out of those kingdoms, the most notable kingdom was the kingdom of the Pallavas. So, Pallavas were the magnificent, I would say, architect of ancient India, in fact. All right, and they happen to contribute. Uh, I mean, huge. I would say. I mean, they added more angles to the field of architecture in India. Fine. So that is what Pallavas are known for. And by the time when we enter into the Chola period, that is specifically in the ninth century CE or AD, temple architecture had already emerged as a most professed field of art, most professed field of art in India, where we see that not only the court was supporting this particular form of art in India, but also it actually became a sort of a popular art in South India. And therefore, we see a good number of temples actually had emerged in South India. So definitely the big temples that actually got immersed in South India, they were largely supported by the state or by the king only. But at the same time, there are certain examples also where the temples had been able to also raise the money from different sources, especially like let's say the merchant guilds. All right, and they were having the association of merchant guilds in South India, like Ayyavol, Anju Vanam. So Ayyavol, Anju Vanam were the guilds of the merchants in South India. All right, this question might be asked also asked to in prelims कि साउथ इंडिया में मर्चेंट गिल्ड्स को क्या बोलते थे तो अय्या वोल या अंजू वानम. So these particular merchant guilds associations, they actually started contributing a huge sum of money as well for the building of temple architecture. Fine. So what we say that temple architecture in South India was not only a court art, but also it became a form of popular art from South India. And that is precisely the reason why we see the good development of architecture in South India. All right, and precisely we are going to talk about today on this particular aspect only. And similarly, I was talking about that there were differences also in the Nagara and so-called Dravida style of architecture, because what developed in South India was called as Dravida style of architecture. So there were differences as well in the Nagara and Dravida style of architecture. And most likely, I mean, of course, the questions that are asked also in both prelims and the mains, they are pertain to the issue of the differences between the Nagara and Dravida style of architecture. So we have already discussed that aspect in the last class itself. And I also told you that there are certain commonalities between the Nagara and Dravida style of architecture. And those commonalities we see in the context of the emergence of a new school of architecture that is called as Vesara School of Architecture. So that Vesara School of Architecture were having the features of both Nagara and Dravida schools of architecture. And what we noticed that this particular school of architecture actually had got developed between North and South India, that is the Deccan area. So in Deccan area, the Vesara School of Architecture got emerged in India as well in early medieval period. And some of the landmark, of course, you can say the examples of this school of architecture happen to be from the era of the Vijayanagar Empire, from the era of the Hoysalas, the Chalukyas, all right, empire. So the Chalukyas, Hoysalas, and Vijayanagar. Now they were the biggest, you can say, supporters of the Vesara school of architecture. Fine. So that is how we see the emergence of a new school of architecture also, which were having the features of both Nagara and Dravida, which is also called as Vesara School of Architecture in our country. Now see, I mean, this is how before the Indo-Islamic school of architecture emerged as a dominant form of architecture, we see already the emergence of the temple architecture in various forms in India. Fine, like Nagara, Vesara, and also Dravida. Fine. Now, I have spoken about the differences or the basic features of both Nagara and Dravida. Now, here in Dravida, we have to also highlight that what was the so specific features of the Dravida school of architecture. Now, let me tell you that we have had the evidence of the building of temples in North India by the bricks. So, temples were built up in North India by using the bricks. Whereas in South India, the temple that got developed, in fact, or the architecture that got developed in South India in the form of Dravida style of architecture, it began with the the use of monolithic rocks, the use of the monolithic rocks that became the material through which they started constructing the temples in South India. For example, one of the earliest of the Pallava king was Mahendravarman, and his period was 610 to 640 CE. That is the early 7th century CE. And Mahendravarman of the Pallava kingdom is said to have the beginner of the temple architecture in South India. Now, what Mahendravarman as the king of Pallava was able to contribute in the temple architecture, he started constructing mandap form of temples in South India. Mandap. So mandap form of temple in South India. All right, let me write it down so that now you can see on the screen. All right, so what Mahendra Varman was able to do and contribute, mandapa form of temple architecture got started by Mahendra Varman. All right, and what kind of this temple architecture it was? This mandapa was basically a cave architecture. It was basically cutting off temples, cutting off cave temples in South India. So what they used to do, they used to suppose, I give you one example to make you understand like very clearly. Suppose there's a big stone keeping like this way. All right, fine. So what they used to do, they used to carve out a sort of a temple from this particular big stone. So this is how the temple was carved out from this particular this is a big stone. This was a stone, and then they used to carve out a temple inside from this particular stone only. Fine. This is basically called as mandapa form of architecture. All right. So the way you have seen, or maybe you may have seen caves similarly style, in a similar style only. Only some floral designs, some designs were given on the arch that was constructed out of this entire mandapa. So normally they used to construct the mandapa like you can say hemispherical surface like this way. All right, this is how they used to construct their mandapa. That was normal pattern of construction of mandapa in the Pallavas. Fine. So this is what was the Mandapa form of architecture that got developed by Mahendravarman. All right. Then you see his successor of Mahendravarman was Narasimhavarman. Now Narasimhavarman was again a magnificent builder of temples. All right. And what did he do? He started developing some different type of temple altogether that is called as Ratha style of temples. Now you see Narasimhavarman, the successor of Mahendravarman. Now, what was his contribution that he contributed in development of the Rathas school of temple architecture in South India? Now, see, I mean, you have to remember this chronology. Mandapa gave a shape to Rathas, and then finally the temple also. So, what was this Rathas and how these Rathas were constructed? Now, see, Rathas was basically again from the same big monolithic stone. They used to not only construct a, let's say, a sort of a cave, but inside the cave they also used to place a deity with the same stone. So with the same stone they used to also keep a deity inside the cave. All right, so see what they did, they started also constructing a sort of a Ratha school of architecture, and these two forms of monuments, especially the Mandapa and the Rathas. Rathas are also called as monolithic temple. So these two schools or these two forms of architecture monuments became very popular in the Pallavas initially. And there are a lot of examples to corroborate this particular fact. For example, in the famous Mamallapuram or Mahabalipuram temple, you must have known about, at least heard about Mahabalipuram or Mamallapuram. Both are same, near to Chennai only. So this Mahabalipuram or Mamallapuram temples were actually constructed by the Pallavas only. Fine. And this Mahabalipuram or Mallapuram temples, they are the great example of Ratha school of or Ratha type of temple architecture. So monolithic temples are largely found in this particular Mahabalipuram temples. The most famous of the temples in the compound of Mahabalipuram or in the area of Mahabalipuram, because in Mahabalipuram there are a lot of temples. In fact, let me tell you one thing. In Mahabalipuram, there are a good number of temples. All right. So out of those temples, the most earliest of those temples that was got developed under the Pallavas it was actually called as 7 pagodas. So 7 pagodas temple. Now 7 pagodas temple or Ratha temple of Mahabalipuram happened to be the one of the earliest of the temples developed by the Pallavas. And then afterwards, there were other temples also developed in the form of Mandapa style, that is called as Adi Varah temple, then Mahisa Mardani temple. All right, Adivara temple, Mahisa Mardani temple, then even the uh, Ramayana or Ramanuja temple, in fact, Ramanuja temple. Fine. So you see, I mean, this is how their so-called temple started developing. In fact, the idea is this, see, like this way, that inside these all caves, this is called as mandapas in the Pallavas. These caves, they were having multiple mandapas. Inside the cave, they were having multiple caves also. The bigger caves used to have multiple caves inside it. Fine. Therefore, it is called as 7 pagodas. What is 7 pagodas? Inside a big cave, once you enter into that, you have 7 more caves, 7 more directions, 7 more caves, in fact. In all those caves, you have some of the other temple. In fact, some of the other deities placed over there. Fine. For example, Mahisa Mardini temple. All right. Let's say Arjuna penance. Arjuna penance sculpture has also been grafted in this Mahabalipuram temple only. This question is asked that in which temple this Arjuna penance has also been grafted by the sculpturist. So the idea is inside the big caves, they were also having multiple caves inside it. And those caves were called as mandapas. Fine, those caves were called as mandapas, and inside the mandapa, they used to also place deities. That used to become rathas, that is monolithic temple in that way. Fine. So the idea is this begin with the mandapa concept of temple architecture. Slowly and gradually, they develop it into a rathas. So mandapa, rathas, and then finally they will enter into the freestanding temple. All right. Then the third phase will come, and that is a phase of the freestanding temple, that is structural temples in the Pallavas. So mandapas gave a shape to rathas, and from rathas it gave to the shape of structural temple in the Pallavas. Fine. And this structural temples, it was started by Narasimhavarman II. Narasimhavarman II. So he was the successor of Narasimhavarman I. So he started this particular structural type of temple, fine, in the Pallavas, and these structural type of temples are popularly understood in the form of Mahabalipuram temple, Mahabalipuram temple, and the most important Mahabalipuram temple, which is a structural style of temple, is Shore temple. All right, Shore temple. Then in the Mahabalipuram area only, apart from Shore temple, they also have the Ishwar temple and Mukunda temple. So Ishwar temple and Mukunda temple. Fine. Now in Kanchi, now other site that was also developed by Narasimhavarman II, Mahabalipuram. These all temples were developed by Narasimhavarman II, the structural temple examples. Then Kanchi is another site. All right, there also he developed Kailas Nath temple. Kailas Nath temple. Then Vaikunt Perumal temple. Vaikunt Perumal. Vaikunt Perumal temple. Then apart from Kailasnath and Vaikunt Perumal temple, they also developed the Rajeswara temple. Fine. So these all examples of temples are there which belong to the structural style of temples in the Pallava period. Fine. Now see the Kailasnath temple of the Pallavas in Kachi, it shows the pinnacle of the structural type of temple under the Narasimhavarman second era. All right, so under his era, it was showed the pinnacle of the achievement in the Kailasnath temple, because in this temple you see the all the structures are very clearly defined, clearly understood, clearly defined in that way. Fine. And by the time when we enter into the Nandi Varman style, in Nandi Varman style, it also became very established style of construction of temple. So Nandi Varman was the last major contributor. Nandivarman was the last major contributor in the Pallava style of architecture. He was in the era of between 800 to 900 CE. Fine. And in Nandivarman, of course, they started even using big stone blocks, big stone blocks on the place of bricks. So big stone blocks on the place of bricks. All right. But their temples were relatively smaller than the Narasimhavarman style of temple. Temples were relatively smaller. For example, Mukteswara temple, Mukteswara temple. All right, so Mukteswara temple, then Matangeshwara temple, Matangeshwara, Matangeshwara temple. So Mukteswara temple, Matangeshwara temple. These all are the examples of the temples which actually got developed in Nandivarman style. But their temples were smaller in size, but they were using big stone blocks to construct a temple. Fine. That is how the Pallavas contributed in the development of the temples. And on this only the Cholas, they magnified the temple architecture. So Cholas inherited the Pallavas style of architecture afterwards. All right. And then by the time of Cholas, we see the emergence of the temples like Brihadeswara temple. Brihadeswara temple, all right, or Gangai Konda Cholapuram temple, Gangai Konda Cholapuram temple. Now it achieved the pinnacle of the temple architecture in South India because it has the biggest, in fact, the longest Viman, longest Sikhar or Viman in South India. In fact, not South India, in entire India. All right. So the longest Viman of any temple was of Brihadeswara temple, also called as Rajarajaswara temple. All right. So these temples actually achieved the kind of growth or the kind of, we can say, magnificent art that was there in this particular temple was really remarkable because it shows two things. When you see such kind of big sikhar, or let's say uh, the Viman, it indicates a couple of things. One is that, of course, they achieved the proficiency in the art of the science of architecture. That is one thing. All right, by this time, the Cholas attained the proficiency in the art of the science of architecture. But at the same time, it also shows their economic prosperity. Idea is that through temple architecture, what do we get to know? We also get to know that what kind of economy, what kind of material prosperity must have been prevalent at that particular point of time. So once you see these people who were involved in the massive temple architecture in South India, and especially the people like Cholas, we can simply understand that Cholas were economically also very powerful. All right, in comparison to the other contemporary kingdoms, and most importantly, the kings themselves, the state themselves, they were also involved in the massive architecture of the temples. Now, the point that many of the economists have agreed upon, that why were they involved in this massive architecture of temples? See, there were multiple reasons behind that. The one is that obviously any form of architecture, any form of your visual expression of art, that is architecture also, that shows the kind of cultural consciousness that prevail at that particular point of time. That is one significance of this form of visual expression of art. Second, it shows also the kind of interest the kind of interest the king was taking in some massive form of architecture. Fine, that is second aspect. Third, temple by the time of early medieval period or in the by the time of even the Gupta and the post-Gupta period, temple have achieved a sort of a symbol to legitimize the power of the king. Understand, if you are a king or so-called you are an emperor, your emperorship would be recognized by everyone by your contribution in temple architecture. So suppose you are a very powerful king and you control, let's say, a vast area. So your authority would not get the recognition from the masses till you construct a massive temple to show them that yes, I am your emperor and you have to legitimize my role, my rule, in fact, in your territory. So see, temple used to always act as a sort of a legitimizing power to the king. It used to always show, signify the authority of the king in that particular area, in that particular locality. Not only that, temple also used to have a big economics involvement to it. Big economics. And what is big economics? You can simply understand that why there is a movement going on in India right now to construct a Ram temple in Ayodhya. So of course, apart from the religious belief, there's also a big economics involvement to it. All right. So exactly the same way, the temples that were constructed there in even in South India, it was not merely for the sake of the belief or sake of, let's say, some religious system to promote it. Rather, it was also a system to promote some sort of economy over there. And even till today, you need to understand a few things. Let's say, let me tell you, like Padma Sambhav temple. The Padma Sambhav temple, the Padma Swami temple, now there in Kerala is one of the richest temples in the world. It is one of the richest temple. In fact, I would say the richest temple in the world. All right. The kind of gold and the kind of money that is still having, it is said that they can run a complete country for more than 10, 12 years without charging any tax. That is the amount of wealth that they have been able to appropriate. And this is, I'm talking about in the contemporary era. Now, understand this particular temple economics also in the early medieval era, when dogma used to overpower our conscience altogether. When the dogmatism or dogmatism used to even overpower our scientific thinking altogether. Now, in that era, obviously, the donations in temples used to be the biggest source of income for the state. Biggest source of income. And this is not what I am saying. This is even what Chanakya has said in his book Arthashastra. Even Chanakya has said in his book Arthashastra about this particular point, that even religion can be sold to earn money. And Chanakya has pushed up this issue for the modern empire. Chanakya has supported this issue for the modern state, that if the modern state needs money, promote idol worship. Promote idol worship, set up idols by the state, not by the public, and collect the revenue from there to run the state. Now see, this is the reason why Chanakya's treatise is understood to be a magnum opus in the field of economics. तो आप समझिए कि रिलीजन को भी आप कमर्शलाइज कर सकते हैं ये हम और आप नहीं कह रहे, ये चाणक्य ने कहा था उस जमाने में जब शायद आप सोच भी नहीं सकते थे कि रिलीजन को भी कमर्शलाइज आप कर सकते हैं। और आज आप और हम देख रहे हैं अपने सामने कि कैसे रिलीजन को कमर्शलाइज किया जा रहा है हर जगह। ऐसा कोई जगह नहीं है किसी भी धर्म में जहां पे कमर्शलाइजेशन उस धर्म के साथ जुड़ा नहीं है। ऑलराइट, so exactly this particular aspect was already happened, I mean had been talked by even Chanakya in his book Arthashastra. Fine, and he says that, he says also that in various places, in various places, Chandragupta Maurya, even Ashoka supported the idea of placing idols to earn revenue, and that is also corroborated by even Patanjali. All right, so Patanjali भी कहते हैं कि हाँ ये होता था, मंदिर बनाया जाता था ताकि वहां से पैसा आए, लोग वहां चढ़ावा चढ़ाएंगे, पैसा वहां से आएगा स्टेट को। तो कहने मतलब ये है कि अगर स्टेट आज भी इन्वॉल्व है इसी काम में तो वो गलत नहीं है, क्योंकि इकोनॉमिक्स में वो सबसे जायज है। ऑलराइट, so in economics everything is actually fair. Alright, so there's nothing called unfair. So in this way you need to understand that what this particular temple economy used to play a role. So temple economy had emerged as a very dominant form of economy during those particular point of time. Obviously the state always survive on the basis of taxable revenues or taxation, in fact, in a particular territory. But suppose in a state where you have a segmentary state like Cholas, the Cholas were segmentary state. When we say segmentary state, what does it mean? It means that the Cholas, they were having the capital, let's say in Kanchipuram, or let's say in Mahabalipuram. All right, but nearby the capital, its periphery, the Chola king was having a direct command and direct control. But Chola was not only in Tamil Nadu, they were also having the spread in Karnataka, they were also having a spread in Kerala, and also in some parts of, let's say, Andhra Pradesh. That was extension of Cholas. Now, in those areas, the Chola king was not having a direct command, direct control. So in the periphery, Cholas did not have the centralized command. That is called as segmentary state. So therefore, the kind of revenue that Chola was also earning, it was limited. And majority of the revenue that Chola king was earning, it was primarily through the trade and commerce. Because Chola was also involved in the trade and commerce, especially with the Southeast Asian countries. ठीक है, तो साउथ ईस्ट एशियन कंट्रीज के साथ काफी ज्यादा ट्रेड और कॉमर्स डेवलप हो चुका था उस समय चोला के द्वारा। और कुछ मतलब ऑफ कोर्स देयर आर प्रूफ्स आल्सो दैट चोला वाज आल्सो हैविंग देयर ओवरसीज एम्पायर इन श्री विजयनगर, श्री विजय एम्पायर, in fact in Malaysia and Indonesia part. So Chola was also having the overseas empire, overseas control in Southeast Asia. Fine. So idea is they were earning revenue through trade and commerce. So taxing the people were having limitation for them. Fine. Now see, money earned through trade and commerce was required to maintain the entire state machinery, required to maintain even the army that was there with the Cholas, king at least, in the center at least. Fine. And they have to also incur for the various sort of expenditures. Now, in the backdrop of this, they were having the option to tax the people. Now, taxing the people they were doing, but they were also having limitation. For example, let's say they were having a tax called Kuruvai. Kuruvai was a tax charged by Cholas. ठीक है, KURUVAI. अब क्या है कि कुरवई से कितना टैक्स कलेक्ट करते होंगे? कुरवई जो था वो चावल पे टैक्स लगता था, चावल ज्यादा प्रोड्यूस होता था वहां पे. So once they used to produce the paddy only, so of course on paddy they used to charge Kuruvai tax. So with that tax also they could not survive. Such a big center of empire in South India could not have been maintained. Now they found an alternative in the form of temple economy. कि अगर टेम्पल बना देंगे बड़ा बड़ा, दूर दूर से लोग वहां आएंगे उसको देखने, पूजा करने. So we will get huge revenue on a daily basis. That was a temple economy. And that is precisely why we see Cholas were the magnificent builder of temple architecture there in India. And of course, because of that only, they were also able to collect huge revenue through the temples. Fine. And therefore, they were able to even make some big temples of South India. All right. So Gangai Konda Cholapuram temple, Brideswara temple, or Rajaswara temple. There are some big temples of South India which are still the landmark examples of the Chola contribution in the temple architecture in India. Fine. And this particular trend of the construction of temples by the Cholas were also continued by the Chalukyas, all right, and other kingdoms who were contemporary to that. You can be surprised to know that Brideswara temple that was constructed in Thanjavur, this Brideswara temple was constructed in Thanjavur. This was constructed in Thanjavur by Raja Raj first, between 985 to 1014 CE. Now, this temple that was constructed by him, it is considered to be the biggest temple ever constructed by any of the kings of Cholas or even South India. Fine. And his successor was Rajendra I. Raja Raj's son was Rajendra I, and he was equally a very prominent power of South India, very powerful king of South India. It is said that he was even able to control Myanmar. He was having his control within Pegu. Pegu was a part of Myanmar. It is still a part of Myanmar, Burma. So he was having control within Myanmar and Sri Lanka. Already, Sri Lanka and Myanmar were part of the Chola Empire under his kingdom. And such was a great kingdom that he was able to develop that he also constructed Gangai Konda Cholapuram temple in a massive style. Alright, in a massive style.
Sir, can you repeat the name again, please?
Yeah, Rajendra first.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So Rajendra first was the son of Raja first. Fine, and his period was from 1014 CE to 1044 CE. So under his regime, he was able to expand the Chola kingdom from South India, from Tamil Nadu area to Sri Lanka to even Myanmar. So that was the extension of his empire, and he also set up a new town altogether that is called as Gangai Konda Cholapuram. Now this Gangai Konda Cholapuram also became their capital, and there only he also constructed a massive temple that is called as Gangai Konda Cholapuram temple. So see, I mean, this is how these Cholas were able to contribute in the temple architecture massively in India. And I just told you that this particular trend was also continued by their successors, especially by the Chalukyas, who were the contemporaries, in fact, also. Chalukyas, Hoysalas, and even the successors like Vijayanagar Empire. Now, they were equally the massive temple builders of India, and their temple style was called as the Vesara temple style. Vesara temple style.
So it's for all three of them?
For all three of them.
Okay.
Their style of temple architecture was called as Vesara temple style. Now you can understand the temples constructed by Chalukyas in Vadami or Badami, Aihole are some landmark examples of temples in Vesara style of temple. All right, so Badami is also called as Vatapi. So Vatapi or Badami, Aihole, Pattadakal, there were three massive cities they constructed, and in these three cities they also constructed massive temples in Vesara style. Even according to many scholars, Aihole is called a city of temples. Aihole is called a city of temples. Fine.
So these were under Chalukyas, the three of them.
They are all Chalukyas. Fine. On the other hand, Hoysalas, they created their capital in Dwara Samudra. This question was asked to you in last year's or this last prelims, that where was or what was the chronology of Dwara Samudra's construction. So it was constructed in the 14th century CE around. All right, that is Dwar Samudra by the Hoysalas, and the Hoysalas had constructed temples that is very famous, the Halibut temples. Halibut. So Hoysaleswara temple is famous in Halibut, Hoysaleswara temple. Hoysaleswara. In Halibut is a massive temple which is basically understood to be a mix of both Chalukya and Hoysala style of architecture. So Chalukya and Hoysala style of architecture. Fine. And then we see the emergence of another very prominent school of architecture under Vijayanagar Empire. Again, the Vesara only, but Vijayanagar made their center of this style of, in fact, the center of the architecture. It was basically Hampi. Hampi, or also called as Vijayanagar. Fine. So Hampi or Vijayanagar found to be the center of the Vijayanagar school of architecture, where they constructed various temples. All right. And of course, some of the remarkable temples of Vijayanagar Empire was the Vitthal Swami temple, fine, the Lotus temple. So Vitthal Swami temple, the Lotus temple are some of the remarkable examples of the Vijayanagar Empire temple. And in Vijayanagar Empire temple, one prominent, you can say, form of architecture that got developed, that is called as Kalyan Mandapa School of Architecture. Kalyan Mandapa School of Architecture. Now, what was Kalyan Mandapa School of Architecture? Let us understand that also briefly over here. See, Kalyan Mandapa, as the name itself suggests, that it is basically a sort of a place where some ceremonial activity takes place. Some ceremonial activities take place, so that is Kalyan in the word that it denotes. In fact, by the time when we entered into the Vijayanagar Empire, the Vijayanagar Empire had already developed not only the massive school of architecture, but at the same time they had started building temples separately for the god and goddesses. That is the significance of Vijayanagar Empire. So for god and goddesses, they started building the separate temple. All right, so idea was that this is how they started building a separate temple for god and goddesses. And most importantly, suppose there are two temples in the same premise. In fact, they used to always have a two temple same premise. All right, one is meant for the, let's say, the god, another one is meant for the goddesses. Fine. So in this two temple, the god and goddess temple, they used to always create a sort of a bridging link between those two temples. All right, suppose there are two temples, now they've constructed one bridging link. Bridging link means that some structure they have constructed, some roof they have constructed. Roof. Roof for what purpose? Linking this temple to this temple via this particular route. Fine. Now this roof that they used to construct to link two temples, this is called Kalyan Mandap. This is called Kalyan Mandap. And what was this Kalyan Mandap? This Kalyan Mandap was basically the place of marriage. Marriage hall. Marriage hall of what? Marriage hall of god and goddesses. See, this was their style of architecture. So now they also started practicing the of course the idea of the marriages between the god and goddesses in the context of Kalyan Mandap. Fine. So this is what was the very important exercise that Vijayanagara Empire started doing. Fine. And this is not the only significance. The point is that by the Vijayanagara Empire, what we see that the massive school of temple architecture had got developed. That is one aspect. Second, they also started constructing two or more temples in the same premise, fine, in the same particular, let's say, area. And in that, they also started constructing the sort of a bridging, I would say, the passage to link the god and goddesses on a particular common point that is called as Kalyan Mandap. And during certain occasions, let's say, celebrating the marriage of god and goddesses, they used to bring the deities of both the gods together at one place, that is Kalyan Mandap. All right. So they used to bring their deities or the idols of gods and goddesses together in Kalyan Mandap, and there only they used to also not only conduct the so-called the marriage, but also they used to celebrate those marriages. Fine. For example, the very famous temple of the Vijayanagara Empire was the Vitthal Swami temple. Now, in Vitthal Swami temple, of course, this practice used to be very common at that particular point of time. Fine. So this question was asked by UPSC in prelims 2020 also, and that was in the context of that in which era the Kalyan Mandap form of architecture got developed in India. Options were Cholas, Pallavas, Hoysalas, and Vijayanagar. So now you get an idea that it was developed in the Vijayanagar period mainly. Fine. So that is the importance of this particular form of architecture. On the other hand, if you go to North India, in North India also the various school of architecture started developing, especially in Odisha. Now in Odisha, you have some landmark examples of temples like Jagannath and Konark temple, or the Sun temple in Konark. So these temples also started having some typical designs, or not typical designs, or typical names, in fact. For example, the Deol and Jagmohan. Deol and Jagmohan. This question can also be asked to you. The Deol and Jagmohan are the features of which school of architecture? So the answer is, of course, Nagara, because in Odisha also Nagara school of architecture was prevalent, but it is the Odisha variety of Nagara school of architecture basically. That's what I can remember. So here in Jagannath and the Konark temple, Deol and Jagmohan were made. So Deol is similar to Sikhar. What we say Sikhar in Nagara school of architecture is called Deol in Odisha style of architecture. So Sikhar is similar to Deol and Jagmohan is similar to Mandap. So Mandap in Odisha school of architecture is called as Jagmohan and Sikhar is called as Deol. So this question can still be asked to you. The Deol and Jagmohan are the school of architecture, school of, let's say, the features of architecture in which particular part of India? East, west, north, south. All right. It is of course in the eastern part of India. Deol and Sikhar, used to be, Jagmohan used to be the feature of Nagara school of architecture. So with this, you can see these all schools of architecture had already been developed in India, and then parallel to this, either they were developed or they were being developed. So parallel to this, the Indo-Islamic architecture also entered India. Fine. So let us see that now. This is an example of this Brideswara temple. We already discussed about the differences between Nagara and Dravida school of architecture. This is the Vesara style of architecture, having the features of both Nagara and Dravida. All right, that is the temple of Halebid. Now you can see this particular slide. This is important for all of you. Now, say in Nagara, Dravida, and Vesara, what all differences are there? In Nagara, what we have just understood, it is primarily, of course, featured or focused in North India. Fine. Dravida in South India, and Vesara in the state of Karnataka, that is largely the region of Vesara style of architecture. Period is also very specifically classified here in front of you. Coming to the next one, that is Nagara has towers or sikhars with rounded top and curved linear outline also. And I told you about the various features of the towers in the form of Famsana, Rekha Prasad, है ना, डिस्कस किया था लास्ट टाइम. सो वो सब जो है नगरा स्कूल ऑफ आर्किटेक्चर के भी फीचर्स है, इनफैक्ट उन टावर्स के फीचर्स हैं. ठीक है. रेखा प्रसाद को लेटिना भी कहते हैं, लेटिना. So Rekha Prasad, Famsana, Vallabhi were the features of Nagara, the style of Sikhar. Okay. So you can see these all names of Sikhar. I mean, even Deol. What is Deol? Deol is also Sikhar. Okay. So these names are used by the architects, in fact, in defining those Sikhars in Nagara's style of architecture. Then you see in the Dravida, of course, towers in the shape of a pyramid called the Viman are present. So that is what was feature of Dravida school of architecture. So we have Sikhar here, we have Viman in Dravida school of architecture. Then we have a towers shows mixed feature of Nagara and Vesara. In the Vesara is, in fact, pillars are absent in these temples. In Nagara, pillars are not largely used, but in Dravida, pillars are prominently used. Fine. And of course, in Vesara also pillars are used, because that, of course, in the Vijayanagar Empire, these all Kalyan Mandapa, they all were constructed under the pillars only. Fine. So big pillars were there to erect the Kalyan Mandapa tower basically, or the roof basically. Fine. Then Gopurams, I told you it is not present in Nagara, but it is always present in Dravida. That's very specific features of Dravida. And then Vesara sometimes present, sometimes not found. That's what not is compulsory feature of Vesara in having Gopuram. Then water tank may or may not be present in Nagara, but in Dravida, water tank is always present to fetch of water in Dravida school of architecture. Fine. In Vesara, it may not be present also in Vesara School of Architecture. So these are some basic differences that you have to always keep in your mind.
So what was the other name of Rekha Prasad?
Latina, Latina.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Now this is the example of Vijayanagar Temple, Vitthal Swami Temple, and the Kalyan Mandap. All right. You can see on the right hand side, this is the Kalyan Mandap. Fine. Where they used to bring the deities together to worship. Both male and female deities were brought together here, and after doing all the rituals, they used to get them married, and then they worship it. Then they used to enjoy the ceremony, in fact, in that way. That was a specific feature in Vijayanagar temples. Okay. Now coming to the Indo-Islamic School of Architecture. See, now we are entering into the Indo-Islamic School of Architecture, and this Indo-Islamic School of Architecture needs to be classified into various phases, especially the initial phase of the slave dynasty, and then followed by the Khaljis, even the Tughlaqs, all right, even the Lodhis. So these all actually happen to contribute in the evolution of the medieval architecture or Indo-Islamic architecture in India. Let us discuss that Indo-Islamic architecture first. See, one very specific feature of Indo-Islamic architecture was that obviously they had brought this school of architecture to India from Central Asia. So from Central Asia, this school of architects went to even Europe, and even they came down to India. So the kind of architecture that got evolved in Europe, especially in Spain and other parts of Europe, and the kind of architecture that got developed in India, having very similar features and similarities, in fact. Fine. So let us discuss what was the specific feature of the so-called Indo-Islamic architecture that entered in India. See, in Indo-Islamic architecture, there were two very important prominent features. One was their design pattern. Another one was their building material. So see, design pattern of Indo-Islamic architecture that began with the entry of the slave dynasty, all right, or the Ubaid Turks dynasty, fine, right from the early 13th century onwards. So they were having two very specific designs in their Indo-Islamic architecture. One was that they were having the system of arcuate form of architecture. Arcuate form of architecture. Fine. There is one very specific feature. And then they were also having a concept of a dome form of architecture. So arcuate, dome, and then even the calligraphy. All right. So there were three very important design patterns of the Indo-Islamic architecture in India. Now, what was that arcuate? Just try to understand that. See, before Indo-Islamic architecture that entered in North India, there were various types of architectures prevalent, in fact. But the most common feature of the North Indian you can say form of architecture was that their buildings were always having a trabeate form of structure. Now, what is trabeate form of structure? See, trabeate form of structure can be understood like this way. Now, see, in the trabeate form structure, what happens? What you try to do, you try to actually erect the roof, all right, over any particular piece of architecture by placing pillars inside it. So these are pillars. Fine. So there are multiple pillars are used to erect this particular, I would say, roof, this particular structure that provides a sort of roof to any particular monument. That is Trevithick's style of architecture. So in Trevithick's style of architecture, the use of pillars are very common. Fine. So to erect any particular piece of wall, a piece of roof, you needed to have more and more pillars. That was Trevithick school of architecture. Now, this school of architecture was prominent in India before Indo-Islamic school of architecture entered India. For example, the Rajput style of architecture was based upon this only. The Rajput style of architecture was based upon this only. Fine. That is Trevithick school of architecture. When the Indo-Islamic, or in fact the Islamic entry happened to India and actually developed into Indo-Islamic architecture, it actually changed this pattern of design in the form of arcuate. So Trevithick, this is what was called as Trevithick school of Trevithick form of design, in fact. Now they changed into arcuate. Now what was arcuate? Now see, arcuate is, in arcuate what they do, they create the arch. All right, this is the arch. Now this arch that is created by them, it actually provides the base for the building over that. All right, this arch support, it gives support to the roofing over that. So without using multiple pillars, so what is done here now, you can see. So without using multiple pillars, you just create an arch, and this arch provides you the support to the building, to the entire building. So you see here, this is how the building would look like. Fine. Earlier, how you were erecting the building? By placing the pillars. Suppose I give you an example. Suppose you place pillars here, place pillars here, place pillars here, and then you have some monuments inside it. Will it be easily visible from here? So obviously not. So visibility from outside in the pillar reduces drastically. All right, it reduces drastically, in fact. But in the arch, when you do not have these pillars, suppose you remove these pillars, all right, then what will happen? Visibility increase sharply from here itself. So whatever, let's say DT, whatever monument you place inside it, it is visible even from here very clearly. Fine, that is one thing. Second, in this particular form of architecture, you need to involve less amount of material. Less amount of material, because you don't have to create multiple pillars. Fine, it also provides a sturdiness to the building. The building becomes more and more sturdy. And most importantly, even by the appearance, it enhances the beauty of the building. So it enhances the beauty of the building. So now you can see that once you have constructed this arch, and secondly, on this arch, what you have done, you have also gone for the construction of a tomb. Tomb, that is, this is dome, that is basically a sort of a semi-spherical again shape. All right, the dome is also constructed on that. Fine. And this dome is basically a sort of a structure that they always create on very prominent, you can say, form of architecture. So generally, initially, they used to construct the architecture for mausoleum. And inside this dome, they always used to keep a tomb of any prominent religious leader. So now you can say that they were having also the dome over the particular structure. All right, that is, dome was also constructed on particular structure by giving certain base on the building, and this is how they used to construct a dome also on the structure. Fine. So inside the dome, they used to always have the tomb also. So that's the reason why it is also called as sometimes dome. So it is mainly dome having tomb also. Fine. So then they also used to have calligraphy. The calligraphy means that, of course, some, let's say, some designs used to be drawn over this. They were mainly the ayats from their Quran. All right. Earlier in the Rajput buildings, they used to have floral designs, mainly the floral designs, but this was changed into also the ayats by the Indo-Islamic architecture. All right, and they were written in the West based on the calligraphy in that way. Now see, the arcuate style of architecture, the having domes over the architecture, calligraphy on the architecture, they became the major design patterns of Indo-Islamic architecture in India. Fine. And the building material they started using was, of course, the red sandstone initially, which was largely and easily available in the country. So red sandstone became the most prominent building material for them. Fine. Along with that, they were also able to use the lime plaster. Fine. To, of course, to block the two bricks of red sandstone. All right. And then finally, they also start using marbles gradually. Fine. So red sandstone, lime plaster, and marbles, they became the most prominent building materials used by them. Fine. So that is some typical features of Indo-Islamic architecture. Now coming back to the slide of the PPT. Now you can see on this particular slide itself the very important example that this is the famous Qutub Minar. All right. Now the first and the foremost thing, this is one of the earliest of the buildings constructed by the Islamic, you can say, the invaders, Islamic founders of Sultanate Empire in India, Sultanate Kingdom, or let's say system in India. So this is the earliest of their contribution in the field of architecture in India. So the point is that what is this and how it was constructed. See, the construction of Minar, Qutub Minar. Now, minarets happen to be one of another very important features of the Indo-Islamic architecture. Minars are the biggest elongated monument. Minarets are the smaller ones, but attached always with the building. Minars may not be attached to the building always. Minars are separately created. Minarets are attached with the building always. So minars and minarets became the important features of these people, also the Indo-Islamic architect also in India. Fine. Now the point is, what was the purpose of this building? Why was it constructed and how was it constructed? See, there are many stories regarding that, but the most prominent and the most acceptable story regarding this particular minar is that they wanted to proclaim the authority of Islam in India for the first time. And that was the message they wanted to give to everyone in India who happened to be the non-Islamic population in this country. So to proclaim the authority of Islam, They got it constructed in India after capturing Delhi in 1206 itself. So Qutbuddin Aibak was the architect, was the person who was behind this particular architecture, and he led this particular campaign of the construction of this particular minar to give a message to all the other kingdoms in India that Islam has now come here and it is going to remain here for permanent basis. That is one thing. It was definitely continued or rather completed by Iltutmish. Fine. And both of them, Qutbuddin Aibak and Iltutmish, were able to use, in fact, they had been using the locally available material to construct these all minars. So largely red sandstones were used by them to construct this particular minar. Fine. Top of this minar, you can see on your screen, there is white portion also. This white portion was added on later on by Firoz Shah Tughlaq. And this white portion, that is upper part of the minar, was destroyed by the lightning, and because of that only, the upper part got damaged. But Firoz Shah Tughlaq, he got it reconstructed, but by using marble. So it has both red sandstone and marble, along with the calligraphy. So it is a perfect example to give you the idea that what are the features of the Indo-Islamic architecture in India. So it was definitely having the materials like red sandstone, marble, and even the calligraphy done on this particular minar. Fine. Then just beside this minar, you have also Alai Darwaja. Alai Darwaja is another example where you can see the dome, the true dome that was constructed for the first time on Alai Darwaja. So true dome, why? Because domes were also constructed before this particular construction, but it is considered as the true dome because it actually has all the features of a dome for the first time. So Alai Darwaja has the significance in the context of having a true dome in India. Fine. And in the Balbal's tomb, we see the true arch. In the Balbal's tomb, we see the first true arch got developed in India. These questions are asked in prelims. So you need to understand that the Balban's tomb has the true arch, whereas the Alai Darwaja has the true dome. And in Alai Darwaja also there's a lotus-shaped arch. This question might be asked to you that in which of the buildings we have found the lotus-shaped arch. That is, lotus is designed on the arch. It is in Alai Darwaja only. I hope you've been to this particular place. No, not yet. नहीं गए अभी तक.
Sir, Gaya.
Acha, you've been. So Amrashi and Nishant have been to this place. What about others? Ritika, Vatsala, and
सर मैं दिल्ली में थी तब लॉकडाउन
अमृतांशु.
लग गया.
अच्छा अच्छा, लॉकडाउन लग गया तो नहीं जा पाए. Okay.
No, sir.
अच्छा, you been to Vatsala, to this place?
No, sir.
No, not yet.
No.
You've been staying in Delhi only, no?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so find out some time.
Okay.
All right, must visit to have your own glimpse of that and your own observation about these all buildings, in fact. Fine. Now let me tell you my few observations of this building, which actually has been drastically changed over a period of time. I visited this place for the first time in 1998 itself. All right, and probably I have been visiting this place more frequently. Whenever someone comes, I do take them to these all buildings to show to them. To, I mean, of course, roam around in Delhi. So I've been visiting. I think may have visited more than I think 6 7 times to this particular place. But I've observed it personally that many of the kind of I would say the architecture or the kind of material that was used in this architecture have been changed by the government. All right. For example, I mean, these things you will not find in any book, not by even in the discussions of the intellectuals. But I can tell you from my own experience that when I visited for the first time in 1998 and again in 2000, 2001, all right, I found that in all these buildings nearby the Qutub Minar, not even inside Qutub Minar, in fact, but nearby the buildings of Qutub Minar, especially let's say the Alai Darwaja area and the mosque area part, the Quatul Mosque area part, is also another structure beside the Qutub Minar. You could have easily found out the material that was used in those all buildings. Uh, According to me, it must have been the building material of some temples in the past, which may have been destroyed by them in the construction of all those Quwwatul Islam Mosque or even other buildings in this particular compound. Because in all those materials, there were the motifs of the gods and goddesses. I still remember I have seen frequent locations the motif of Lord Ganesha. All right, that is the kind of material, that is the kind of bricks that was used there. So Lord Ganesha and even the goddess Saraswati. All right, so their motifs were located, their figurines were located on the building itself. But today, if you go, they have replaced all those material. You will not find any of those evidences now available over there. So this is basically a destruction of history. All right, the way the history was, it should have been there like this way only. But the government has tried to manipulate the entire history in the past so that people should not have any problem with these all buildings. All right, because this it was my greatest surprise when I visited perhaps in 2000, I think 16, 17. Once again, then I found that all those material have been replaced. All right. And of course, during those time in 1990s, in fact, in 98 or around 2000, people didn't have this camera wala mobile. है ना? So obviously it was difficult to take those pictures. Neither we were having, I was having even a camera to take those pictures. So I didn't have those pictures, but I do have a complete memory about those all, you can say the material, those all figures and figurines that was displayed there in the compound of Qutub Minar. So idea is this is not the only you can say monument which has this particular you can say the materials used by them. Even the monument that was constructed like Dhai Dinka Jhopra in Ajmer. I don't know how many of you went to Ajmer. If you have been to Ajmer, you have a fair idea. I've been to Ajmer also thrice in fact. And there just beside the you can say the mausoleum of Muinuddin Chisti. All right, that's a famous Sufi saint. Just beside that particular mausoleum only, we have also the Dhai Din Ka Jhopra, that is a basically mosque. All right. So this Dhai Din Ka Jhopra mosque is near to that particular uh, Chisti's Dargah only. Fine. And this was also constructed by Kutubuddin Aibak. So Aibak also built the Dhai Din Ka Jhopra mosque in Ajmer, and it was constructed over a Vaishnav temple. Over a Vaishnav temple. All right. And initially that Vaishnav, it has been said initially that particular area was also a temple of Jaina. So over Jaina, Vaishnav temple was constructed, and then over Vaishnav temple, this Dhadinga Jhopra mosque was constructed. Fine. So that's the reason why, I mean, people do say, if some historians do say, that the Kutub complex was constructed over the Saraswati temple, and this Dhadinga Jhopra was constructed over the Vaishnava temple. So those temples were destroyed and destructed, and then finally those materials were used to construct these all buildings. Fine. That was the story of this particular era of the Indo-Islamic architecture. So this is how Indo-Islamic architecture started developing in India. Fine. Now you can say this is another marvelous piece of architecture of the Tughlaqs. That is tapered wall of their building. In fact, you can see this is a wall which is having a slanting you can say feature. Slanting सा दिख रहा होगा आपको ये. This is a famous Tughlaqabad fort, again located in Delhi. गए कि नहीं गए यहाँ तुगलकाबाद फोर्ट? नहीं. निशांत आप?
रहे उज्जड़ या बसे गुज्जर.
अच्छा. So been to that. अच्छा.
Yes sir, I went on a heritage walk sir.
अच्छा, heritage walk. Okay. So Tughlaqabad fort is again a massive fort. All right, and of course inside the fort only you will find all these buildings. So this is another marvelous piece of architecture of the Tughlaq era. Again, you see the mix of both red sandstone and even the marble that was used for the construction of the dome. All right. And the feature of Tughlaqabad or Tughlaq architecture was primarily in the context of that they were able to use the slanting wall. All right. So slanting wall was not used in any of the other buildings of the Islamic architecture. Fine. So Muhammad bin Tughlaq is also credited to construct the cities as well. So Tughlaqabad was developed by Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq as a city. All right, and there was they developed it as a capital also. And then finally, Muhammad bin Tughlaq also developed this Tughlaqabad fort in terms of construction of another city that's called as Jahanpanah city. Jahanpanah city. All right, that was developed by Muhammad bin Tughlaq only. And then by the time of the Firoz Shah Tughlaq era came, he is said to have the founder of many cities of India. That was the biggest contribution of Firoz Shah Tughlaq. All right, so all those cities that you know today, let's say Firozabad, Fatehabad, Hisar, all right, Jaunpur. Now these all cities are actually cities developed by Firoz Shah Tughlaq only. Fine. And if you've been to Hauj Khas area, Hauj Khas is a popular area in Delhi, especially in South Delhi. In fact, because of various outlets of eateries and other. All right. So of course, Hauj Khas also has been developed by these Tughlaqs only. Fine. So Firoz Shah Tughlaq was equally instrumental in developing the Hauj Khas area. So this is how you see they were able to contribute in the of course the Indo-Islamic architecture initially. But the peak of this architecture was especially in the era of the Mughals. All right, so these three very prominent monuments of the Mughals are actually the most remarkable contribution of the Mughal architecture. Of course, the first one is Humayun Tomb, very famous architecture, famous place also in Delhi. Second is absolutely the Buland Darwaja that is in Fatehpur Sikri, Agra. So Buland Darwaja constructed by, of course, Akbar. Then the last one that is on your right hand side, that's the famous Taj Mahal. All right. So these are three very prominent examples of the Mughal architecture. Fine. And all of these three, you can see the arch very clearly. You can see the dome very clearly. All right. Now, if you be there, if you see the, let's say the kind of, you can see the facade, that is the wall of all these buildings, You'll also find the calligraphy nicely used in these all buildings. All right, so calligraphy nicely used in all these buildings. Fine. So as you know, the Humayun tomb, of course, it was constructed by the mother of Akbar. All right. So that was the of course Akbar must have been there in the behind of Humayun tomb. It's the credit goes to the mother of Akbar only. All right. So Humayun tomb was the first of the architectures constructed. Fine. And then you see the contribution of Akbar, especially in developing the red forts, red fort of Agra, particularly Allahabad, Prayagraj, in fact. So there are a few red forts which have been developed by Akbar, and this Alai, this sorry, Alai, I mean this Buland Darwaja that is considered the biggest of the gateways in India. This Buland Darwaja was constructed also by Akbar, especially after his winning in Gujarat. All right. So after winning Gujarat to commemorate the Gujarat victory, he is said to have constructed the Buland Darwaja in Fatehpur Sikri somewhere around 1573. All right, that was the another very major contribution of Akbar, and Akbar himself actually constructed his own tomb in Sikandara. Sikandara is also near to Fatehpur Sikri in Agra. So that is what Akbar did, but definitely by the time of Jahangir came, one very important contribution of Jahangir era was the art of Pitra Dura. Now, see, this is the art of Pitra Dura. Pitra Dura was an art of inlaying the precious stones inside the marble. In fact, all right. So, art of Pitra Dura got developed under the era of Jahangir, and it is said that in the tomb of Itmad Dawla, Itmad ud Dawla, father of Nur Jahan, in the tomb of Itmad Dawla, father of Nur Jahan in Agra, the first evidence of Pitra Dura, first evidence of the Pitra Dura technique is found. All right. So the first evidence of Pitra Dura technique is found. Fine. So this question is asked in prelims that in which monument the Pitra Dura technique has been found for the first time. So answer is Itmadu Daula's tomb in Agra. So who was Itmadu Daula? So he was the father of Nur Jahan. Fine. So that is Pitra Dura. All right. By the time of Shah Jahan, it came. Shah Jahan became famous for the construction of Red Fort in Delhi, Jama Masjid in Delhi, and also the Taj Mahal of Agra. So he became the biggest, I would say, contributor in the Mughal architecture, because by his time it is said that Mughals actually had been at its pinnacle of glory and power. So it was at pinnacle of its glory and power, and the revenue of Mughals was hovering around more than 100 crore rupees in today's, of course, in those eras context, 100 crore rupees per annum. That was the revenue earned by the Mughals in those era. So that is what was the earning of Mughals per annum, and therefore you can understand, since they were having huge resource, huge money in their possession. So definitely with that, if they were having a choice or test also, they could have become the magnificent builders in India. So exactly that has happened in the case of Shah Jahan, because he is said to have constructed the seventh city of Shahjahanabad. All right, that is the area of today's Red Fort. है ना? So Shahjahanabad was, of course, constructed by him only, and the entire area that you see today in nearby Lal Killa or चांदनी चौक वाला एरिया जो है पूरा, ठीक है, जहाँ मस्जिद एरिया जो है पूरा, वो that was developed by him only, in fact. And then of course his daughters also contributed in developing those all markets all right, nearby the Red Fort, Chandni Chowk Market, fine, developed by his daughter only. So this is how, of course, I mean, he was also able to contribute. But the remarkable fact about Taj Mahal was that Taj Mahal was his biggest of the achievements, in fact. All right, so Taj Mahal was the biggest of his achievements because of various reasons. That is the kind of design, the perfection is there. All right, and the entire monument was constructed in white marble. So these all aspects of Taj Mahal make it a distinct monument altogether from entire medieval period. All right, and the person behind that particular construction of Taj Mahal was Ustad Ahmad and Ustad Isa. So Ustad Ahmad and Ustad Isa were the chief architects. Ustad Ahmad and Ustad Isa, ISA.
All right. Okay.
Ustad Ahmad and Ustad Isa.
Thank you, sir.
So they were the chief architects of Taj Mahal. Fine. And of course, Taj Mahal construction had also involved many of the architects coming from Persia and even from Rome or Greece. So architects had visited from Persia and Rome and Greece to see the perfection of the construction of Taj Mahal. So there are many stories surrounding to Taj Mahal, and you are well aware of that story. So there's nothing to talk about that. So definitely, I mean, this Taj Mahal was an achievement of Shah Jahan, and of course, even by the time of Aurangzeb came, he also tried to replicate Taj Mahal by constructing Bibi Ka Maqbara in Aurangabad, that is also in front of you on your screen. Now, Bibi Ka Maqbara, he wanted to replicate Taj Mahal, but he could not do it. All right, why? Anyone?
सर पुअर इकोनॉमिक कंडीशन औरंगजेब के टाइम में डेक्कन में उन्होंने इतना ज्यादा इतना ट्रेड मतलब इन्वेड करने के चक्कर में बहुत ज्यादा उनका इकोनॉमी मतलब पैसे यूटिलाइज हो गए
ठीक है, that is one very obvious aspect. Then और कुछ?
Sir, as you mentioned earlier, that as Aurangzeb was away fighting wars in the Deccan, so the royal artisans could not receive patronage, so they gradually shifted to regional kingdoms.
Correct. So that is another very correct explanation. So of course, both the reasons were involved in there. While all right, so of course, economically, Mughals were now on a declining phase. That's one thing. And all the form of architecture that we have seen, it also signifies the not only the outlook of the emperor, but also the economic condition of a particular kingdom. Fine. So even the material prosperity is also reflected in this all form of architecture. So when you see the buildings like Taj Mahal, when you see the buildings like let's say Buland Darwaja, you can simply come out with this conclusion that the authority must have been there very powerful at that particular point of time. Okay, because if you don't have the power, you can't build, can't go for the construction of such a huge and mammoth building. In fact, all right, there is one thing that is very much clear to the after observing those buildings. Second is that obviously the taste, personal taste. So definitely Shah Jahan was having more interest in this particular form of architecture than Aurangzeb. There's no doubt about it. And of course, thirdly, we have also understood that by the time of Aurangzeb came, Aurangzeb was involved in the fighting in various wars in Deccan. So he didn't get the time to consolidate and to concentrate on the school of art and architecture. Fine. And according to certain historians also, he didn't have much liking. Much liking, that was his personal taste basically. He didn't have much liking also towards the art and architecture. Therefore, he also abandoned the entire atelier, entire artisans or the craftsmen started moving away from the court of Mughals to other regional empire, regional kingdoms of India. So that was precise reason that why this Bibi Ka Maqbara signify, all right, signify that he wanted to replicate, but he could not do because of these all reasons. All right. So that is how the you see the Indo-Islamic architecture got a complete, you can say, phase. It completed its phase in by the time of the end of Aurangzeb. Okay. Then with this, you see the emergence of the regional architecture also took place in India. Fine. Regional architecture, especially like you have the famous Jaipur Hawa Mahal. All right. So Jaipur Hawa Mahal, if you have been to Jaipur, you must have seen this. All right. So Hawa Mahal of Jaipur is a famous sort of a building even today. That was constructed after, of course, with the decline of Mughals only. In fact, all right. Then you have the next one is the Gol Gumbad of Bijapur. Now, Gol Gumbad is the Bijapur of is another very important example because it is the biggest of the domes constructed in India. All right. So Gol Gumbad is another example before all of us. So this is a Bijapur kingdom which also started contributing in the school of architecture. So we see with the decline of the Mughals, with several schools of architecture started developing, especially Rajasthani, that is the Rajput style of architecture, the regional kingdoms, especially in the context of the Bijapur, Bahmani. All right. So these all started developing in the medieval period only, especially in the time of the Mughals. Bijapur school of architecture got developed. All right. And then you see with the decline of Mughals, you see the entry of also the Victorian style of architecture by the Britishers. All right, so Victorian style of architecture also started developing by the Britishers. That is how the entire cycle of architecture is completed. Fine. So that is the entire story of your architecture. All right. Now, what you have to do after doing this exercise, I'm giving the pages from this particular book to read. ठीक है, इस बुक से कुछ पेज में लिखवा रहा हूं, आप लिख लीजिए, नोट कर लीजिए. Now you have to go through the page number 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, लगातार ही है 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, fine, that's it here. Then next you should go through page number 109, 110, 110 मतलब 1111, 111 in fact, 111, then 112, 13, 14, 15, then you can leave 16, 17, then you can come to 18, 118, then 120, then 121, and then 124. All right, so these pages you have to go through along with this entire notes. Now with this, your entire architecture will be thoroughly done. Nothing will be left, in fact. All right, so whatever will be asked to you, you will be having that position in terms of course, giving the right answer in the examination. Fine. So that is all about your architecture part. Fine. So with this, your entire art and architecture is now completed. All right, and your art and culture aspect is also not done with. So art and culture में आपको इतना ही पढ़ना था. ठीक है. अब मान लीजिए कुछ इश्यूज हैं, छोटे छोटे इश्यूज है. सपोज कि मैं एग्जांपल देता हूं कि किसी बुक में दिया होगा कुछ स्पेसिफिक क्राफ्ट्स, टॉय फॉर्म, पपेट्री, ठीक है, मान लीजिए ड्रामा के ऊपर ही. तो वैसे क्वेश्चंस जो हैं, they are not so important unless and until that they remain in current affairs. Fine. So what you have to do now, you have to keep a tab upon current affairs, And in art and culture, whatever events have unfolded in last one year specifically, you have to gather those informations, and those informations you have to add on in your notes of these various chapters. I mean, if you remember, we have discussed the chapters like philosophy, religion, literature, painting, isn't it? Dance, drama, music, then even architecture. So in these chapters only you have to keep adding those additional informations. Suppose I give you one example to understand it. Now these days the government is promoting the local, the regional toy forms in India. Toys. For example, Channapatna toys. Have you heard about Channapatna toys? It was a news in the Hindu also, it was covered just 2 or 3 days back. Government also has covered in their various programs in last few months, if in fact few weeks in fact. Now Channapatna toys has been talked by even Prime Minister Narendra Modi to promote it from India, and Indian local toys, local regional toys should be given the global presence or global attention. The idea is that it's also correct to a certain extent that our children do not know much about our toys, but they know about Barbie dolls. They know about the He-Man and Superman or Spider-Man. All right. So this is something, again, we are missing the root of our culture. All right. So lack of promotion to the local craftsmen, lack of promotion to our local culture has been resulting into the so-called removal of a base gradually. So obviously we were also not knowing. So how the children of next generation will be knowing about it? So therefore, it is important also to promote even the local culture in the form of the local toys. So Channapatna is a famous toy form of Karnataka. So now the government is promoting Channapatna toys. All right. So similarly, there are other toys also from different states. So you need to be very thorough with the current affairs, especially the Hindu. If you are going through, you will come to know about all these episodes, these incidents on a regular basis. तो अब करना क्या है कि सपोज कि चन्नापटना टॉयज आपने देख लिया, पढ़ लिया अखबार में, तो पढ़ के छोड़ना नहीं है, क्योंकि वो भूल जाएंगे आप. ठीक है, आपको याद नहीं रहेगा कि कहाँ पढ़ा था, कहाँ का है, और आप कंफ्यूज हो जाएंगे एग्जाम के अंदर. So the moment you have read it, what you need to do, just try to write it down in your maybe a chapter that you can add on, let's say some local crafts, miscellaneous chapter on art and architecture or art and culture. There you can add these informations that this is a form of a toy popular in Karnataka, recently being promoted by the government to make it as a global toy. And for that, there is a department, there's a ministry which is also promoting it. So this is how you have to keep adding these informations in your art and culture notes. ठीक है, तो अब आपका काम क्या है कि अब आपको ये जो मैंने पेजेस बताए वो तो पढ़ ही लेना है, आजकल में खत्म कर देना है, और पढ़ के उसके अंदर जो कंटेंट है, जो फैक्ट्स है, उसको निकाल के अपने नोट्स में नोट डाउन कर लेना है. ठीक है, उसके बाद करंट अफेयर्स उठाना है पिछले 1 साल का, और सिर्फ आर्ट एंड कल्चर, उसके अलावा कुछ नहीं. फिलहाल पूरा 1 साल करंट अफेयर उठाइए, मंथली उठा लीजिए, मंथली किसी का भी ले लीजिए, आप विजन का डाउनलोड कर लीजिए, अवेलेबल है. आप क्या कीजिए कि मंथली ले लीजिए, पिछले 1 साल से, मतलब 2020 की जनवरी से उठा लीजिए आप. ठीक है, और उस जनवरी से लेके सिर्फ आर्ट एंड कल्चर का चैप्टर ही पढ़ना है आपको, और कुछ नहीं पढ़ना उसके अंदर फिलहाल, और कुछ मत पढ़िएगा, नहीं तो सब गड़बड़ हो जाएगा. सो व्हाट यू डू, सिर्फ आप पर मंथ, हर मंथ का आर्ट एंड कल्चर वाला पढ़ लेना है, जहां भी उसमें आपको नया नया इंफॉर्मेशन मिलेगा, जिस सेक्शन में भी, यू रीड इट एंड यू नोट इट डाउन इन योर ओन हैंड रिटन नोट्स. ठीक है. Suppose you come to know about the kind of even the bull race. That's also part of our culture in South India. और आपने करंट अफेयर्स में पढ़ा, ठीक है. The famous bull race is followed in Tamil Nadu, in other parts also of India. ठीक है. अब क्या है कि वो जो बुल रेस आपने पढ़ लिया, तो कौन सा बुल रेस कहाँ फॉलो किया जाता है, कर्नाटका में कौन सा है, तमिलनाडु में कौन सा है, केरला में कौन सा है. So you'll note it down that entire names on the miscellaneous topic of art and architecture or art and culture, in fact. समझ रहे मेरी बात. तो this is how you will incorporate some additional informations in your art and culture chapter. That is the second task that you have to do. ठीक. थर्ड टास्क नोट कर लीजिए. इसके बाद सिर्फ आपको एक काम और करना है, that you will go through India Yearbook chapter on art and culture. चैप्टर नंबर 5 है वो, ठीक है. चैप्टर नंबर 5 that is on art and culture. So go through that book, find out the additional informations, like let me tell you, like they will give you the information regarding the Ministry of Culture having further, I mean, these all departments working as autonomous departments only, like NSD, National School of Drama, Sangeet Natak Academy. So just go through those details, write it down, when it was formed, what it does, which languages are promoted, which form of dramas are promoted. So just mention about those factual information. That's it. All right. And then write it down also in miscellaneous topic. But suppose you come across information regarding Satariya dance. So Satariya dance is followed in Assam, and you get to know that some additional information is also given on Satariya dance in India book. Now we have discussed Satariya dance also in the class. So in the notes only, there only nearby Satariya dance, which you have mentioned in your class notes, you add an additional information from India Yearbook there itself. All right. So what you do, make a box. There you write additional information on Satariya dance. And very small letter you can write, the source is page number 61 from India Yearbook, IYB 2020. So you should know that from where you have written this information. ऐसा ना हो जाए कि कहां से लिख दिया आपको याद ही नहीं है, फिर आप परेशान हो रहे हैं कहां पे मैंने लिख लिया था इसको. Because you need to understand, ये लंबा प्रोसेस है. You will not be able to memorize everything in that way. You need to organize everything in that way. And once you organize the things in the proper way, automatically it will come into your memory. All right. So that's what exercise you have to do. Fine. तो ये काम करना है. And this Manorama Yearbook has come out in the market. Fine. So I have not got it, so I have to purchase it. So once I'll get it, then I'll tell you exactly which all pages you have to go through from Manorama Yearbook also. ठीक है. तो उसमें कुछ पेजेस होंगे. अगर आप खरीद पाए तो ठीक है, नहीं तो मैं उनको फिर स्कैन करके आपको एक साथ PDF फॉर्म में भेज दूंगा. ठीक है. सो दैट इज ऑल अबाउट योर आर्ट एंड आर्किटेक्चर. तो अब आर्ट एंड आर्किटेक्चर पे जितना आपने काम कर लिया है, जितना हमने कर लिया है, उस पर आपको कॉन्सोलिडेट करना है. यही आपका डायमेंशन है. इन्हीं चैप्टर्स में आपको आर्ट एंड कल्चर को समझना था. अब इसके ऊपर कॉन्सोलिडेट कैसे करना है मैंने समझा दिया. स्टेप 1, स्टेप 2, स्टेप 3. So there are 3 steps now you are supposed to follow one by one. ठीक है. तो आज कल में ये एनसीईआरटी का जो 8, 10, 15 पेज बताए हैं वो पढ़ के उसमें जो एडिशनल इंफॉर्मेशन वो नोट डाउन कर लीजिए. फिर एनसीईआरटी को छोड़ दीजिए इसको. उसके बाद आप अगले 2-3 दिन और रखिए जिसमें आप सिर्फ करंट अफेयर्स पिछले 1 साल का जो आर्ट एंड कल्चर पे हुआ है वो डेवलप करके उसको आप लिख लिए. और लास्ट में आपको करना क्या है कि इंडिया एयरबुक के उस चैप्टर को पढ़ लेना है. इसके अलावा एडिशनल इंफॉर्मेशन होगा अगर मनोरमा एयरबुक में, तो आई लेट यू नो, अदरवाइज नो नीड ऑफ गोइंग टू दैट. इतना करने के बाद आर्ट एंड कल्चर में 99% तैयारी आपकी हो चुकी है. ठीक है. अब आपको सिर्फ उसको रिवाइज करना है मल्टीपल टाइम्स सो दैट यू शुड नॉट फॉरगेट इट. ठीक है, तो चांसेस ये है कि अगर 10 क्वेश्चन भी होंगे आर्ट एंड कल्चर पे तो आप मैक्सिमम 8-7 आसानी से कर पाएंगे सही, बिना परेशान हुए हुए। ठीक है, तो दैट इज हाउ यू हैव टू डील विद दिस। फाइन। So if you have any specific question you can raise, you can ask your question or your doubts. Forms are now out. I mean vacancies are not out. You must be knowing now कि उन्होंने एडवर्टाइजमेंट निकाल दिया है तो वैकेंसीज कम हो गए हैं। ठीक है, और जैसा ट्रेंड चल रहा है पता नहीं ये कितना रहेगा। ठीक है, आने वाले सालों में तो कोशिश करना है कि प्रोबेबली दिस टाइम वो 721 जो है उसमें से एक मेरा भी हो। ठीक है, तो उसके लिए यू हैव टू फाइट। ऑलराइट, सो ट्राई करना है, अच्छे से ट्राई करना है, गिव योर बेस्ट। तो उसमें करना क्या है कि अब नाउ यू विल हैव टू वर्क very meticulously, specifically in the context of your timetable and the time that you are going to devote upon every area. ठीक है, तो अब थोड़ा सा क्या करना है, मैं शेड्यूल को बहुत रियलिस्टली फॉलो करना होगा कि अगर आपने सेट कर दिया है कि ये 10 तारीख को मेरा ये खत्म होना चाहिए तो खत्म होना चाहिए, भले उसके लिए रात को पूरा जग के पढ़ना पड़े या आप सुबह से उठ के पढ़ रहे हैं, वो आपके ऊपर डिपेंड करता है, बट यू हैव टू फिनिश इट अप। ठीक है, तो उसमें ये नहीं सोचना है कि अब शेड्यूल जो है, अब सुबह हो गया है, अब रात हो गया है, सुबह हो गया है तो आज जाके वॉक करना है, रात हो गया तो अब सो जाना है, अब सब भूल जाइए। अब समझना क्या है कि अब मेरे पास टारगेट है हर दिन का और हर दिन को इसको अचीव करना है। ठीक है, तो इसलिए शेड्यूल ऐसा बनाना है कि अगर कुछ बीच में डिस्टर्बेंस होता भी है तो भी आप उस डेट तक उसको, डेडलाइन तक आप उसको कंप्लीट कर ले। ठीक है, पॉसिबली अगर है रात को जग के पढ़ना तो रात को जग के पढ़िए, अगर दिन में डिस्टर्बेंस है तो नहीं, अगर दिन में कंफर्टेबल है तो दिन में पूरा पढ़िए। सो व्हाटएवर सूट्स यू, यू विल हैव टू अप्लाई दैट पर्टिकुलर स्ट्रेटजी। ठीक है, लेकिन अब क्या है कि अब आपको सिलेबस खत्म करना है, ये ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है आपका टारगेट वाइज इनफैक्ट। सो स्टार्ट वर्किंग अपॉन दैट नाउ। ठीक है, सो आई होप कि आपने देख ही लिया होगा वैकेंसीज क्या है। फॉर्म्स जब भरना होगा तो जो भी डिफिकल्टीज होंगे पूछ लीजिएगा एक बार, तब उसको फाइनल सबमिट कीजिएगा। ठीक है,
सर मैं आपको अभी क्लास के बाद कॉल कर लूँ फॉर्म के लिए पूछने का, मुझे थोड़ा सा
अच्छा
डाउट है। हाँ जी।
अच्छा, ठीक है ठीक है, ओके। एनी अदर स्पेसिफिक क्वेश्चन यू हैव? ठीक है, तो इतना ही रखते हैं, है ना। और फिर इधर जो है हम लोग थोड़ा सोशल इश्यूज शुरू करेंगे, तो निधि मैम विल टेक सम क्लासेस ऑन सोशल इश्यूज आल्सो, so that she can give you some orientation on social issues. Social issues largely it will be asked in mains, लेकिन अभी कुछ जो बेसिक चैप्टर्स हैं she will be doing that, उसके बाद मेंस के समय she will be completing that aspect। ठीक है ना, तो वो करना है। और now you have to focus upon rest of the history part and then also your polity, geography, economy तो हो गया है, that is completely done with, उसी पे आपको अब आपको डेवलप करके रखना है करंट अफेयर्स के साथ। ठीक है, और पॉलिटी और ज्योग्राफी है, ज्योग्राफी निखिल सर इज नॉट डूइंग इट। सो पॉलिटी आई टोल्ड जस्ट नाउ कि संडे से वो भी थोड़ा थोड़ा स्टार्ट करेंगे। ठीक है, ताकि उसमें भी ओरिएंटेशन आपका आ जाए पॉलिटी के लिए भी। फाइन, ठीक है, दैट इज हाउ वी आर गोइंग टू नाउ डील विद। ठीक है, पेपर हिस्ट्री वाला आप लोगों ने सबमिट जितने किया ठीक है, अभी तक मुझे सबने नहीं किया सबमिट। हिस्ट्री पीटी वाला जो क्वेश्चन पेपर है वो मुझे थोड़ा सा और डिजाइन करना है, कुछ क्वेश्चन उसमें पुराने हैं वो हटाने थे, तो मैं डिजाइन करके आपको आज कल भेज दूंगा। ठीक है, क्योंकि आज से ही मुझे थोड़ा सा रिलीफ मिला है, टाइम मिला है काम करने को, तो मैं आज कल में करके आपको भेज दूंगा हिस्ट्री वाला पीटी का सिर्फ क्वेश्चन। ठीक है, अभी फिलहाल। ठीक है, तो यही प्लान रहेगा। फाइन, सी यू देन अगेन। फाइन, तो कल निखिल से मिलते हैं, फिर आई विल स्टार्ट आल्सो विद सम मॉडर्न इंडियन हिस्ट्री एज वेल। ठीक है, तो मॉडर्न हिस्ट्री भी शुरू करेंगे प्रोबेबली इस वीक से नहीं, नेक्स्ट वीक से ही। ठीक है, तो मॉडर्न इंडिया ताकि पढ़ा दो तो उससे भी बहुत सारे क्वेश्चन आपके जो है हिस्ट्री के लड़ जाएंगे। तो मॉडर्न इंडिया हो जाएगा, आर्ट एंड कल्चर हो गया, इकोनॉमी हो चुका है, ज्योग्राफी हो रहा है, ऑफ कोर्स आई मीन आपका पॉलिटी होगा। ठीक है, थोड़ा इकोलॉजी एनवायरनमेंट पे भी आई हैव आस्क्ड सर चरण सर टू टेक सम क्लासेस। ठीक है, तो इकोलॉजी एनवायरनमेंट पे भी वो कुछ स्पेशल क्लासेस लेंगे। ठीक है, तो उस पर भी हो जाएगा काम। तो मेनली जो 5-6 एरिया है पीटी का वो सारा हम कर लेंगे अगले 1 महीने के अंदर ही। ठीक है, दैट इज द टारगेट। फाइन, सी यू देन अगेन, थैंक यू देन। Bye bye.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, thank you.
Bye. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.